The blood drained from AOC's face when Lauren Boebert placed those leaked NASA documents on the table. Those documents contained proof that all the climate data AOC had used for her Green New Deal was completely fabricated. The leaked research from MIT and Stanford showed that AOC had deceived millions of Americans with lies, manipulated data, and fake science. What happened in the next 150 seconds would expose the biggest scientific fraud in political history and prove that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had built her entire political career on climate lies designed to destroy the American economy while enriching her political allies. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation that's about to shatter everything you thought you knew about climate change and the Green New Deal, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. You're about to witness the complete destruction of the most famous climate activist in America using her own scientific advisors, leaked emails, and authentic NASA data. The packed House committee room buzzed with electric tension on this crisp September morning, the kind of charged atmosphere that precedes a devastating earthquake. What was supposed to be a routine hearing on environmental policy was about to become the most explosive scientific fraud exposure in congressional history. Sitting at the witness table, 37-year-old Congresswoman Lauren Boebert from Colorado had come armed with evidence that would destroy the entire foundation of the modern environmental movement. Her forest green blazer was perfectly tailored, her demeanor calm and methodical, but those who knew her recognized the look in her eyes, the same focused determination of a scientist who had just discovered that decades of research had been built on lies. Lauren Boebert had spent 18 months conducting what would become the most thorough investigation of scientific misconduct ever undertaken by a member of Congress. Working with whistleblowers from NASA, MIT, Stanford, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, she had assembled evidence that would prove the climate crisis had been systematically manufactured through data manipulation, fraudulent research, and coordinated deception. Her team had obtained leaked internal communications from major climate research institutions, authentic temperature data that had been hidden from the public, and testimony from scientists who had been silenced, threatened, and blacklisted for questioning the climate change narrative. What they had uncovered was a conspiracy so vast and so thoroughly documented that it would fundamentally change how Americans understood both science and politics. Across the committee room sat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, 34 years old and radiating the kind of supreme confidence that comes from believing you've successfully convinced the world that you're saving the planet. Her signature red blazer was designer perfect, her carefully styled hair gleaming under the committee room lights, and her demeanor suggested a woman who thought she had successfully built a political movement on unshakable scientific foundations. AOC represented the new face of environmental activism, young, passionate, and absolutely convinced of her moral superiority. From bartender to congresswoman to global climate icon, she had built her entire political identity around the claim that she was fighting to save humanity from climate catastrophe through her revolutionary Green New Deal. But behind the carefully crafted image of a climate warrior lay a different truth. For years, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had been using fraudulent scientific data, manipulated research, and outright lies to build support for policies that would fundamentally transform the American economy, while enriching the special interests that funded her political operation. She had built a movement based on fear, deception, and scientific fraud. She thought the truth was buried so deep beneath layers of institutional support and media protection that it could never be exposed. She was about to learn otherwise. This confrontation was the culmination of one of the most extensive scientific investigations ever conducted outside official academic channels. Lauren Boebert had begun questioning the climate data supporting the Green New Deal 18 months earlier, when inconsistencies in AOC's presentations started forming patterns that suggested systematic data manipulation. Her staff had started by examining the scientific sources cited in AOC's climate presentations and Green New Deal documentation. They noticed that key data points often contradicted the original research papers, that temperature graphs had been altered to show more dramatic warming trends, and that inconvenient data that showed natural climate variations had been systematically excluded. But the real breakthrough came when a NASA climatologist reached out to Boebert's office with evidence that the agency had been pressured to manipulate temperature data to support predetermined political conclusions. This scientist, whose identity would remain protected, provided access to authentic climate records, internal communications, and suppressed research that painted a completely different picture of Earth's climate than the one being presented to the public. What followed was a painstaking process of reconstructing the real climate science from authentic sources, while documenting how that science had been systematically corrupted for political purposes. Boebert's team had to verify temperature records from multiple independent sources, analyze statistical manipulation techniques used to create false warming trends, and piece together communications between scientists, politicians, and activists that revealed the coordinated nature of the deception. They discovered that temperature data had been systematically adjusted to create warming trends that didn't exist in the raw measurements, that climate models had been programmed with false assumptions to generate catastrophic predictions, and that scientists who questioned these practices had been blacklisted, defunded, and destroyed professionally. Most shocking of all, they found evidence that AOC knew her climate data was fraudulent and had deliberately used false information to generate fear and support for policies that would benefit her political and financial backers while devastating the American economy. During her rise to political prominence, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had perfected a system for weaponizing fraudulent science that was so sophisticated it fooled millions of Americans and most of the media establishment. Her operation relied on a network of compromised scientists, activist organizations, and media allies who worked together to create and disseminate false climate information. The scheme worked by taking authentic climate data and systematically manipulating it to create the appearance of catastrophic warming. Temperature records were adjusted using statistical techniques that enhanced warming trends while suppressing cooling periods. Climate models were programmed with false assumptions about carbon dioxide sensitivity that guaranteed apocalyptic predictions regardless of actual atmospheric conditions. The manipulated data was then packaged into compelling presentations that used sophisticated graphics, emotional appeals, and cherry-picked examples to convince audiences that immediate, radical action was necessary to prevent climate catastrophe. AOC became a master at presenting fraudulent science in ways that seemed credible to non-experts, while appealing to emotions rather than rational analysis. Her operation was so successful that it attracted support from across the political spectrum. Environmental groups embraced her message because it supported their fundraising efforts. Politicians adopted her proposals because they offered opportunities for massive government spending. And media organizations promoted her claims because climate crisis stories generated audience engagement. The most disturbing aspect of the fraud was how AOC used her manufactured climate crisis to justify policies that would fundamentally transform American society, while enriching the special interests that supported her political career. The Green New Deal wasn't about saving the planet. It was about consolidating political power and economic control using fear generated by fraudulent science. The House Environmental Policy hearing had been scheduled to review AOC's latest climate proposals and discuss implementation strategies for Green New Deal policies. AOC had enthusiastically agreed to testify, confident that she could use the platform to advance her environmental agenda while reinforcing her position as America's leading climate activist. She had no idea that Lauren Boebert had specifically requested to participate in this hearing because she knew it would provide the perfect forum to expose AOC's scientific fraud in front of a national audience while addressing the very policies that were built on that fraudulent foundation. While AOC prepared her standard presentation about climate catastrophe and the urgent need for Green New Deal implementation, Boebert was preparing to present the most comprehensive case of scientific fraud ever documented in American political history. The committee room was packed with environmental activists, climate researchers, policy experts, and reporters who expected to witness routine discussion of environmental policy. Major news networks had assigned their top science correspondents to cover what they assumed would be a straightforward hearing about climate change and renewable energy. None of them were prepared for what they were about to witness: the complete destruction of the modern environmental movement's scientific foundation, accomplished through the simple presentation of authentic climate data that had been hidden from the American people. The hearing began with routine questions about renewable energy technology, carbon emission reduction strategies, and the economic implications of Green New Deal policies. AOC delivered passionate responses that emphasized the urgency of climate action and the catastrophic consequences of inaction. Her answers were emotionally compelling and designed to reinforce the narrative that immediate, radical action was necessary to prevent planetary catastrophe. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, Boebert began when her questioning period arrived, her voice carrying the authority of someone who held explosive evidence. Your Green New Deal proposals are based on specific climate projections and temperature data. Can you tell us about the scientific sources you've relied on to support your claim that we have only 12 years to prevent climate catastrophe? AOC's response was a passionate defense of mainstream climate science, delivered with the fervor of someone who genuinely believed she was fighting to save humanity. Congresswoman Boebert, the science is absolutely clear and settled. NASA, NOAA, and the IPCC all confirm that we're facing unprecedented warming that threatens human civilization. The data shows conclusively that without immediate action, we'll face catastrophic sea level rise, extreme weather, and ecological collapse within a decade. The answer sounded authoritative and scientifically grounded, exactly what the audience expected to hear from someone who had built her career on climate activism. But Boebert had spent months preparing for this moment, and she knew that behind AOC's passionate rhetoric lay a foundation of scientific fraud that would collapse under scrutiny. She reached into her briefcase with methodical precision, retrieving a thick folder marked with NASA, MIT, and Stanford logos, and placing it deliberately on the witness table, where every camera could capture it. The gesture seemed routine, but experienced observers immediately sensed that something unprecedented was about to unfold. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, Boebert said, her voice taking on the analytical tone of a scientist presenting research findings. I'd like to examine some of the actual data behind your climate claims. I have here authentic research from NASA, MIT, and Stanford that I think will provide important context for your environmental proposals. The committee room's large screens flickered to life, displaying official NASA documents that would make headlines around the world. The letterhead clearly showed National Aeronautics and Space Administration, along with data classification codes and research timestamps that immediately caught everyone's attention. These are authentic NASA temperature records, Boebert announced, her voice carrying across the now-silent committee room with the authority of a scientist presenting peer-reviewed research. These documents were provided by NASA climatologists who were concerned about the systematic manipulation of climate data for political purposes. AOC's confident expression began to waver as she realized what she was looking at. Her face grew pale, her hands gripped the witness table, and her voice took on a defensive tone that everyone in the room immediately noticed. Congresswoman, I'm not sure what you think those documents show, but NASA's public climate data clearly supports the consensus on global warming. Public climate data, Congresswoman? Boebert interrupted, her voice cutting through AOC's protest like a laser through fog. These are NASA's internal unadjusted temperature records, the raw data before it was modified for public release. Let me show you what NASA actually measures versus what they report to politicians like you. She clicked to the first temperature chart, and the screen displayed side-by-side graphs that would end AOC's climate career. This is NASA's raw temperature data from their satellite measurements spanning 40 years. As you can see, it shows natural temperature variations with no significant warming trend. But this second chart shows the same data after NASA's adjustments for public release, dramatically enhanced warming that doesn't exist in the actual measurements. The committee room erupted in gasps and murmurs, but Boebert continued her methodical presentation. The interesting thing about these adjustments, Congresswoman, is that they consistently enhance warming trends while suppressing cooling periods. Raw data showing natural climate cycles is systematically modified to create the appearance of catastrophic warming. AOC tried desperately to regain control, her voice cracking under pressure as she realized her scientific foundation was crumbling in real time. These charts are being taken completely out of context. Climate science is complex, and adjustments are necessary to account for measurement variables. Adjustments for measurement variables? Boebert shot back, advancing to the next screen with devastating precision. Let's examine that claim, Congresswoman. This is internal research from MIT's Climate Laboratory that analyzes the statistical techniques used to create climate warming trends. The screen displayed a comprehensive analysis that exposed the fraud. According to MIT's independent analysis, NASA's temperature adjustments create warming trends of 0.8 degrees Celsius that don't exist in the raw satellite data. The warming crisis you've built your career on is literally manufactured through statistical manipulation. But Boebert wasn't finished with her scientific destruction. This MIT study also analyzed the climate models used to generate the catastrophic predictions in your Green New Deal proposals. Their conclusion: the models are programmed with false assumptions about carbon dioxide sensitivity that guarantee apocalyptic results regardless of actual atmospheric conditions. She clicked through screen after screen of authentic research. MIT scientists discovered that climate models consistently ignore natural climate drivers like solar variations, ocean cycles, and volcanic activity, while dramatically overestimating human influence. The models aren't predicting climate. They're programmed to generate predetermined conclusions. But the authentic climate data was only part of Boebert's presentation. She had also obtained internal communications that would prove AOC knew her climate data was fraudulent. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, we also obtained email communications from your own climate advisors that show you've been aware of the data manipulation for years. The screen displayed an email exchange that would end AOC's environmental credibility forever. This email from Dr. Michael Patterson, your chief climate advisor, is dated March 12, 2022, 6 months before your latest Green New Deal presentation. Let me read it for the committee. Alexandria. The NASA temperature data we're using has been heavily adjusted to enhance warming trends. The raw satellite measurements don't support our catastrophic timeline, but the public won't understand the technical details. Recommend continuing with adjusted data for maximum political impact. Gasps turned to shouts of outrage as AOC's response appeared on screen. Michael, public doesn't need to understand the science. They need to feel the urgency. Use whatever data generates the strongest emotional response. The planet is more important than technical accuracy. The systematic nature of the deception was becoming clear to everyone in the committee room. This wasn't scientific error, Congresswoman. This was deliberate fraud. You knowingly used manipulated data to generate fear and support for policies that would fundamentally transform American society. Boebert's investigation had uncovered an even more disturbing aspect of a climate fraud: the systematic suppression of scientists who challenged the manipulated data. But the data manipulation was only part of the conspiracy, Congresswoman. These documents show how scientists who questioned the climate fraud were systematically silenced, defunded, and destroyed professionally. The screen displayed a series of communications revealing the suppression campaign. This is an email from the National Science Foundation discussing Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a climatologist who published research showing that recent warming was within natural variation ranges. The email discusses ensuring her research doesn't receive future funding and preventing publication of climate denial research. AOC tried to interrupt. Scientific peer review naturally filters out flawed research. Peer review or political censorship. Boebert cut her off. Here's an email from the journal Nature discussing Dr. Robert Chen's research on urban heat island effects that explained warming trends through city growth rather than carbon dioxide. Chen's research undermines climate urgency messaging. Recommend rejection regardless of scientific merit. The evidence of scientific suppression was overwhelming. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez lost her tenure at Stanford for publishing research showing that climate models consistently failed to predict actual temperature changes. Dr. Michael Torres was blacklisted from conferences for demonstrating that historical climate data showed similar warming periods long before industrial carbon emissions. She displayed a comprehensive chart showing the scope of the suppression. Over 40 climate scientists have been professionally destroyed for challenging the climate consensus. Their research was suppressed, their funding eliminated, and their careers ended not because their science was wrong, but because it threatened the political narrative you've built your career on. But the most devastating part of Boebert's presentation focused on the real purpose behind AOC's climate fraud. While you were terrifying Americans with fake climate data, Congresswoman, the real purpose of your Green New Deal was revealed in these internal communications with your financial backers. The screen showed emails between AOC and renewable energy companies. This email from Sunrise Energy Corporation is dated September 15, 2021. Alexandria. Our wind and solar investments require government subsidies to remain profitable. Continue emphasizing climate urgency to justify massive renewable energy spending. ROI on political contributions has been exceptional. AOC's face was ashen as the financial motivations behind her climate activism were exposed. This email from Green Future Holdings details a $50 million investment fund that requires Green New Deal passage to achieve projected returns. You weren't saving the planet, Congresswoman. You were generating profits for your financial backers. Boebert's voice rose with righteous fury. Your climate crisis was manufactured to justify the largest wealth transfer in American history. Trillions of dollars in government spending, mandatory renewable energy purchases, and elimination of fossil fuel competition, all based on fraudulent science designed to enrich your political allies. Boebert had saved the most damaging evidence for last, recorded phone conversations that captured AOC discussing her knowledge of the climate fraud. Congresswoman, we also have recorded phone calls where you discuss the manufactured nature of the climate crisis with your advisors. The first recording began playing, and AOC's voice filled the committee room, discussing her true understanding of climate science. The actual temperature data doesn't support our timeline, but we can't let perfect science prevent necessary policy. Americans need to believe the crisis is immediate and catastrophic, or they won't support the economic transformation we need. Her advisor's voice responded, "What if independent scientists expose the data manipulation? AOC, we control the academic funding, the peer review process, and the media narrative. Independent scientists can be marginalized as climate deniers funded by oil companies. The public will believe our version because it comes from official sources." The conversation continued with devastating revelations. The beauty of the climate crisis narrative is that it justifies any policy we want to implement. Economic transformation, government expansion, social control. Everything can be presented as necessary to save the planet. After systematically destroying AOC's fraudulent claims, Boebert presented what authentic climate science actually revealed. Now that we've exposed the fraud, Congresswoman, let me show the committee what authentic climate data actually demonstrates about Earth's climate. She displayed comprehensive charts from multiple independent sources. Satellite temperature measurements from the University of Alabama at Huntsville show no significant warming trend over the past 25 years. Ocean temperature measurements from the Argo buoy system show natural variation cycles with no catastrophic trends. The authentic science painted a completely different picture. Ice core data spanning 800,000 years shows that current carbon dioxide levels and temperatures are well within natural ranges. Historical climate records demonstrate that warmer periods in human history were associated with prosperity and abundance, not catastrophe. She presented the real climate consensus. Over 31,000 scientists have signed petitions stating that carbon dioxide is beneficial plant food that enhances crop growth and forest expansion. The claimed 97% consensus exists only among scientists whose funding depends on supporting the climate crisis narrative. AOC made one final desperate attempt to salvage her credibility. These documents are clearly taken out of context by climate deniers funded by fossil fuel interests. Fossil fuel interests? Boebert's voice cut through the desperate deflection. Congresswoman, these documents come from NASA, MIT, Stanford, and your own climate advisors. The only financial interests exposed here are the renewable energy companies that have profited from your fraudulent climate claims. She looked directly into the cameras for her final statement. Every American needs to understand what we've exposed today. The climate crisis is a manufactured deception designed to justify the largest expansion of government power and corporate welfare in American history. The final blow was comprehensive and devastating. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you've used fraudulent science to terrify Americans, especially children, with lies about climate catastrophe. You've advocated for policies that would destroy American prosperity based on data you knew was manipulated. Your environmental activism is scientific fraud, and your Green New Deal is economic warfare disguised as planet-saving. As the committee room erupted in chaos, one thing was absolutely clear. Lauren Boebert had just destroyed the entire foundation of the modern environmental movement using authentic scientific data that had been hidden from the American people. The fearless woman from Colorado had proven that when authentic science confronts political fraud, truth always prevails, even when that truth threatens the most powerful political movements of our time.